This week's gospel is a continuation that builds on the imagery of all this vineyard imagery that Jesus has been using for the last several weeks, right? We had the parable of the laborers, where guys go out at different times during the day and they all get the same pay, and wonder, is it fair for him to give us the same pay? And so we had this question of the fairness of God, right? Last week we had this parable of the two sons, one who was, they're both asked to go out and work in the vineyard. One said yes and didn't do it. The other one said no, but he went ahead anyways, right? So Jesus has been using all this vineyard imagery for a while. This week's parable is a very threatening parable for the religious leaders and for, frankly, all the people who were listening to Jesus at the time. This story about a guy who has this vineyard and he sends some servants and the people in the vineyard beat them up, right? All this stuff is a very thinly veiled message to the people that God is like, you are the vineyard, I'm the vineyard owner, right? I've sent you prophets for thousands of years and you're not listening to them, right? And so finally I'm going to send my son. And you should listen to him, right? Because he's my son. And the people are like, let's take the son, let's kill him, take him out of the city and kill him, right? Jesus is talking about how they're going to crucify him at some point, right? And so the message to us is, there's a couple things here. One of them is, how do we receive the messengers in our lives that God sends to us, right? We might not have, prophets running around in our towns and our schools, at our places of work telling us, thus says the Lord, blah, 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 right? Like these other prophets did. But there are people in our lives that try to speak the truth of God into our lives, and do we receive that even if we don't necessarily like the message, right? We're sinful people. Doesn't mean we're horrible people, right? We're sinful people, though, so the message that God sends to us doesn't always resonate comfortably because it bumps up against our sin, and we don't necessarily like that. When we're called to change, we don't necessarily like that, right? How do we receive that message from the messengers that God sends to us, whether it's our priests, our religion teachers, our catechists, our parents or grandparents who are trying to tell us, you really should go to church more often, or you really should pray as a family more, or you really should do this thing. How do we receive that? But then also in our families, there's a question there. How do we receive the messengers in our households, right? I think of my own kids when we send one kid to get the others and tell them, hey, it's time for dinner, or hey, it's time to get ready for bed. You should be able to think, if I'm sending the oldest kid, there's some authority there. But far too often the other kids are like, I don't want to hear this from you. And so mom or dad have to come and personally deliver the message. In our own households, how do we deal with people who are bearing messages for us, even if it's a message that we don't like? Can we respect that messenger? Do we respect that messenger and the message? Or do we try to just fluff off the messenger until someone comes in heavy-handedly and forces us to do the thing that we didn't necessarily want to do? So how do we receive messengers in our homes, and how do we receive messengers from the Lord? And how do we receive correction in general?